Winnie the Pooh is back for revenge and plans to slaughter an entire town. The movie is set a year after the events of the first movie. It begins with a recap of the previous movie, when Christopher Robin met Winnie the Pooh and his animal friends in the 100-acre wood forest in his childhood. Christopher left these animals, and they eventually became starved and started feeding on people. The deaths of the victims were blamed on Christopher when no sign of these animals was found. The people lit the forest, which killed most of these animals, but Pooh and some of his friends survived. Christopher is now working as a junior doctor in Ashdown, but is still treated like an outcast, while Pooh is planning to burn down Ashdown. Now, we see 3 girls in a van, trying to summon a spirit. Spirits don't arrive, but Pooh and his friends do. They impale a girl with a rod, and Pooh rolls over their van. One of them tries to escape in her car, but Pooh catches her and breaks her legs and arms. He snaps the girl's face in a bear trap and ends her life. The second girl screams in fear when a creature named Owl arrives. He takes a shaft and impales her. Presently, we see Christopher with his therapist, Samantha. He tells her that he still has nightmares. The therapist consoles him and recommends that he worry less. Afterward, Chris meets his girlfriend, Lexi. He mentions worrying about people who still think of him as a murderer, but she comforts him, saying people will forget eventually. He mentions taking her to a rave later, but Lexi disagrees, saying she has to babysit. She drops Chris off at his home and leaves. Upon arrival, Christopher finds out that someone vandalized his dad's car. Chris apologizes to his dad, Alan, but Alan is a supportive father who doesn't mind. Later at night, we see 3 hunters searching to eliminate Pooh and his friends. On the other hand, Owl arrives at his treehouse, where Pooh, Piglet, and Tigger live as well. Owl mentions taking revenge from Ashdown for burning their forest, and especially from Christopher for betraying them. Now, Piglet attacks the hunters, but they shoot his face off. Pooh attacks them and murders all of them brutally, but one fortunate hunter survives. He gets up in his wounded condition and heads towards the city hospital. Subsequently, in the hospital, Chris tends to a child and gets called by his boss. He mentions that Chris's murder accusations are impacting their image, so they're going to let Chris go. Chris understands and agrees. He notices the janitor staring at him and leaves when suddenly a critically wounded hunter is brought into the hospital. The nurse informs Chris that the patient mentioned getting attacked by animals in the forest. Christopher wonders if he met Pooh and his friends. He returns home to his parents, who tell him to call his younger sister for lunch. Chris goes to his sister Ella's room. Ella mentions her real name is Bunny, and she prefers that. The siblings have a loving bond and a good dynamic. Later in the forest, we see a father and a son watching birds. The kid sees Owl sitting on the trees and runs away, while the father gets attacked by Owl. Owl cuts him into pieces and throws his limbs in the sea, while he and Pooh watch from the bridge. Now, Chris visits his therapist again. She tries hypnosis with Chris so he can recover some memories from his childhood. She tells him to close his eyes as he hears the sound of her tool. The lights get darker, and Chris starts to see his childhood. He sees himself playing with his younger brother Billy. He remembers playing hide and seek with all the kids when Billy went and hid in a car, but he got kidnapped that day. Christopher opens his eyes and remembers seeing a man who kidnapped his brother, but doesn't remember his face properly. He feels guilty for not being able to rescue Billy, so Samantha consoles him, saying he was just a child, so there was nothing he could do. After the session, Chris calls Lexi and mentions remembering his brother's kidnapper. Lexi feels happy to realize the therapy is working for Chris. Lexi mentions being busy babysitting. She is looking after her neighbor's kid, Freddie, who is a maniac. She ends the call and checks on Freddie, who is watching horror movies. Lexi tells him to stop watching, but Freddie mentions his dad allowing him to watch slasher movies. She starts playing with Freddie, while the police stumble upon Owl's cave. They investigate and find severed limbs and hanged corpses in the house. Suddenly, Tigger arrives and murders all of them. Back at Chris's house, Chris confronts his parents and mentions remembering his brother's abductor, but doesn't remember his face. His parents are supportive. His father, Alan, mentions that they've already lost a son before and don't want to lose their second son either, so if he remembers anything else, he can share it with them freely. In the night, Chris looks up articles of child abduction similar to Billy's. He discovers that 7 children were abducted, like Billy, and were handed over to a scientist named Arthur. Arthur experimented on the kids, but they all passed away. The next day, Officer Daughtry arrives at their home to question Chris. He mentions that the police have uncovered a crime scene similar to the 100-acre massacre. He questions Chris about his whereabouts last night, and his parents confirm that Chris was with them. The officer gives them a heads up and tells Chris to take care. Later that day, Chris goes to the rave party with Lexi and his friend Finn. They look around, but Lexi's friend mentions Chris attracting negative attention because of his accusations, so Chris leaves. He heads to his hospital to meet the wounded hunter who called for Chris. He writes down for Chris that he was right, and Pooh and his crew attacked him. He takes off his bandages and reveals his torn-up face. Chris takes a moment to realize his experiences were real and not imaginary, but he notices the janitor staring at him again. Chris remembers Billy's abductor, and it was the same janitor. Chris goes after him, but he has escaped by then. We see Finn showering at his place, and we notice Owl in his house. Owl attacks Finn and ends his life by throwing acid on his face. On the other hand, Chris waits outside for the janitor and follows him to his home. He sneaks in with a knife and confronts the janitor. His name is Cavendish, and Chris asks why he kidnapped his brother and what he did to Billy. Cavendish apologizes to Chris, stating that he still regrets it to this day. He mentions handing Billy to Dr. Arthur Gullop. Cavendish helped Arthur because he was in debt, and Arthur paid him to end his debts. Chris asks if Billy is still alive, so Cavendish tells him the whole story. He reveals that Dr. Arthur experimented on the children by mixing their DNA with animal DNA, and it worked. The children became mutated animals like monsters, but Arthur got scared and wanted to get rid of the kids. With the help of Cavendish, Arthur destroyed all his work and burned all of his labs. He took the kids to the 100-acre wood forest and decided to end their lives. Cavendish mentions he was too drunk and passed out, and when he woke up, Arthur had buried the children. Cavendish got enraged and shot Arthur in the head, but it was too late. Cavendish had lost hope, but the children weren't exactly dead. They crawled out of their graves and lived on. Cavendish reveals he knew these animals were responsible for the 100-acre massacre last year, not Chris. He burns some old letters from Arthur and apologizes to Chris for the trauma before shooting himself. Now, Lexi tries to put Danny to sleep. She hears some noise in the house, realizing an intruder has broken in. Meanwhile, Freddy's granddad, Officer Gilbraith, calls him to check on him. No one picks up the call because Lexi and Freddy are hiding. They both use Freddy's toy car with a camera to look around the house, and they see Pooh has entered their house. Pooh searches upstairs for them, but they escape. Luckily, Officer Daughtry had arrived. Lexi informs them of Pooh, but he doesn't believe her, so he sends her deputy to look around. She searches the house, and Pooh attacks her. He rips out her arm and murders her. In the meantime, Chris listens to Arthur's audio tapes that he found in Cavendish's house. Arthur mentions the kids becoming a successful experiment, but their animalistic characteristics were growing and becoming a danger for him. Chris gets a call from Lexi, who mentions checking up on his parents because a lot of murders are turning up in Ashdown. Unfortunately, Pooh had made his way to Chris's parents' home. He attacks Chris's mom and kills her. Alan goes to check on his wife, but we hear his screams. Bunny comes across Pooh, but Pooh doesn't do anything. Chris arrives home and finds the corpses of his parents. He cries for a moment, but realizes Bunny is missing. He looks around the house, but doesn't find her. Pooh heads to the rave party and begins his killing spree. He murders a girl, severing her head with a bear trap. Everyone runs out, but Pooh gets his hands on most of them. The remaining people get cornered by Pooh and Tigger. Tigger slays all of them one by one. Meanwhile, Chris arrives at the rave and finds bodies everywhere. On the other hand, Lexi tracks Chris's phone and drives her way to the rave while Owl chases her. Chris confronts Tigger and shoots him, but Tigger manages to escape while Pooh is slaughtering people in the boiler room and severing heads with saws. Chris lures Pooh into the forest. Pooh arrives with a chainsaw, and both are ready to battle. Pooh obviously overwhelms Chris, so he starts hiding. Eventually, Pooh comes across the place where he was buried as a kid. He starts remembering his childhood, and Chris realizes Pooh is Billy. Pooh chokes Chris, but Lexi arrives to save Chris. Pooh tries to murder Lexi, but Chris axes Pooh in the head. Pooh falls inside his grave, while Lexi and Chris hear police sirens. They get rescued by the cops and find out Bunny was with them. They ride away, and the movie ends here. In the post-credits scene, it is revealed that Owl has rescued Pooh and Piglet's bodies. He plans to revive them, and the movie ends here. I hope you liked the story recap. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Thank you for being a part of Black's Movie Recaps. If these tales of mystery and intrigue sent shivers down your spine, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Black's Movie Recap for more bone-chilling narratives. Stay tuned, and until next time, stay captivated.